March the 8th, 1945. The morning frost clung to the hedgerows of Cologne like death itself, and inside the cramped belly of an M4 Sherman tank named Eagle 7, Corporal James "Jimmy" Harmon was doing something his crew considered borderline insubordinate. He was taking his time. The 22-year-old loader from Bakersfield, California, had developed what his gunner called that maddening ritual during their advance through the Rhineland. While other loaders slammed 76mm rounds into breeches with frantic urgency, Harmon performed each loading sequence with the measured precision of a watchmaker. He would cradle each shell, check the round type with his eyes, not just his hands, rotate it to ensure the driving band aligned perfectly, then guide it home with a motion that seemed almost gentle. His commander, Lieutenant Robert Fisher from Detroit, had nearly replaced him twice. His gunner, Sergeant William Wild Bill Morrison from Texas, had called him every name in the book. But their driver, Private Thomas Kowalski from Chicago, had noticed something the others hadn't. Harmon never made mistakes. The context of their mission that morning came from intelligence reports that would later be documented in the official records of the 3rd Armored Division, as noted in the historical archives of the United States Army Heritage and Education Center. German forces were conducting a fighting withdrawal through Cologne's eastern districts, and among them were elements of the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion, units equipped with the dreaded Panzer VI Tiger tanks. The Tiger. Even the name carried weight. With its 88mm gun and armor thick enough to shrug off most American shells, it had earned a mythical status among Allied tankers. The standard tactical doctrine, drilled into every Sherman crew, was simple and grim. It took 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger, and 4 of those Shermans wouldn't be going home. The numbers were cold mathematics written in burning metal and young men's lives. Eagle 7 had been operating with Combat Command B for 6 weeks, supporting the infantry advance through what remained of Hitler's Reich. They had seen action at the Roer River crossing, survived the hell of the Hurtgen Forest's tail end, and pushed through 24 villages whose names none of them could pronounce. Through it all, Harmon had maintained his methodical approach, even as the tempo of combat escalated around them. Fisher had questioned him about it once, during a brief respite in a captured German farmhouse. "You're going to get us killed with that slow-motion routine," the lieutenant had said, cleaning his sidearm by candlelight. Harmon had looked up from the round he was inspecting for cracks, something he did obsessively during downtime, and replied with quiet conviction, "Fast doesn't matter if you jam, sir. Fast doesn't matter if you load the wrong round. Fast doesn't matter if you're dead." Morrison had laughed bitterly at that. "We're all dead anyway in this tin can. Might as well die quick." But Harmon shook his head. "My uncle was a loader in the Great War, sir. Artillery. He told me something before I shipped out." The young corporal paused, his hand still moving over the shell casing with practiced care. He said the loaders who panicked, who rushed, who let the fear make them sloppy, those were the ones who got their crews killed. The ones who treated every round like it was the only round, like it was the most important thing in the world at that exact moment. Those were the ones who came home. Now, as dawn broke over Cologne's shattered spires and Eagle 7 rumbled through streets lined with rubble, that philosophy was about to face its ultimate test. The destruction of Cologne stretched before them like a vision of the apocalypse. Buildings that had stood since the Middle Ages were reduced to skeletal frameworks of stone and twisted girders. The famous cathedral, though damaged, still dominated the skyline, a defiant monument amid the devastation. But Fisher wasn't concerned with architecture. His attention was fixed on the tactical map spread across his knees and the crackling reports coming through his radio headset. "Eagle 7, this is Rattlesnake 6, the battalion commander's voice cut through the static. "Be advised, we have unconfirmed reports of heavy armor in your sector. 2, possibly 3 Tigers spotted near the Cathedral Square. Infantry encountered them at 0700 hours. They've withdrawn. Proceed with extreme caution." Fisher felt his stomach tighten. He had seen what Tigers could do. At the Roer crossing, he had watched 1 Tiger destroy 4 Shermans in less than 3 minutes, the German gunner firing with mechanical precision, while American shells bounced off its glacis plate like pebbles off a castle wall. The 5th Sherman had finally gotten a lucky shot into its tracks, immobilizing it, but by then the field had been littered with burning hulls and screaming men. Copy that, Rattlesnake 6, Fisher responded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through his veins. Eagle 7 proceeding with caution. He switched to the crew's intercom. You all heard that. Tigers in the area. Morrison, you're going to need to be perfect today. Driver, keep us mobile and near cover. Harmon. He paused, knowing what he was about to say might sound desperate. I need you faster today. I know your system, I respect it. But if we see a tiger, we're going to need volume of fire. There was a moment of silence in the intercom, filled only with the rumble of the Sherman's engine and the metallic clanking of its tracks on cobblestones. Then Harmon's voice came through, calm and unwavering. With respect, Lieutenant, changing my system now would be the worst thing I could do. You hired me to load right, not load fast. If we see a tiger, I'll load right. That's how we survive. Morrison cut in before Fisher could respond, his Texas drawl sharp with tension. God damn it, Jimmy, this isn't the time for your philosophical bullshit. A tiger can put a round through us before you finish inspecting the shell for scratches. Then you better make your first shot count, Bill, Harmon replied quietly, because if you miss, I'll have another round ready. A good one. One that won't jam, won't misfire, won't cost us the seconds it takes to clear a malfunction. You do your job, I'll do mine. Kowalski spoke up from the driver's position, his voice muffled by the engine's roar. I'm with Jimmy. I've driven with 3 loaders, and he's the only one who hasn't screwed up under fire. Not once. Fisher absorbed this, recognizing the moment for what it was, his crew asserting their expertise in the face of terror. He had learned in his 8 months of command that the best leaders knew when to trust their men's judgment, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. All right, he said finally. We do it your way, Harmon. But Morrison— I know, Lieutenant, the gunner interrupted. First shot has to count, it always has to count. The Sherman rolled deeper into the ravaged city, turning onto Kolumbastrasse. The street was a canyon of destruction, buildings reduced to facades that could collapse at any moment. Fisher scanned through his periscope, searching for the telltale signs of armor. Track marks in the debris, the smell of diesel exhaust, the unnatural shadows that might conceal 80 tons of German steel. Historical records from the 3rd Armored Division's after-action reports, preserved in the National Archives, document that the morning of March the 8th saw some of the fiercest urban combat of the Cologne campaign. German forces, though depleted and demoralized, fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland's ruins. The Tiger tanks, assigned to rearguard actions, were positioned to ambush American armor at key choke points throughout the city. Eagle 7 approached an intersection where Kolumbastrasse met Schildergasse. The morning sun, breaking through the smoke and dust, created harsh contrasts of light and shadow. Fisher ordered Kowalski to slow down, his tactical instincts screaming danger. This was perfect ambush territory. Multiple sight lines, plenty of cover, rubble that could conceal anything. Hold here, Fisher commanded. Morrison, scan right. I've got left. The Sherman's turret rotated with its characteristic whine, Morrison's gunner's sight sweeping across the devastated storefronts and collapsed masonry. Harmon, in the fighting compartment below, had already positioned himself with a 76mm armor-piercing round in his hands, though he hadn't loaded it yet. He believed in being ready without being premature. Loaded guns in static positions made nervous crews do stupid things. Movement, Morrison suddenly barked. 10 o'clock, 200 yards behind the— Jesus Christ, it's a tiger! The German tank emerged from behind a collapsed apartment building like a prehistoric predator, its angular hull catching the morning light. Even at 200 yards, the tiger looked impossibly massive, its long 88mm gun barrel seeming to stretch halfway across the intersection. The white Balkenkreuz on its turret side was barely visible through layers of mud and grime, evidence of the brutal retreat from the Rhine. Inside Eagle 7, the world compressed into a single moment of crystalline terror. Fisher's mind raced through the tactical calculations he had memorized during training at Fort Knox. The Tiger's frontal armor was 100mm thick at the glacis plate, sloped at 40 degrees, effectively 140mm. The Sherman's 76mm gun could theoretically penetrate that at close range if the shot was perfect, if the ammunition was optimal, if luck was on their side. 200 yards wasn't close range, not for what they needed. "Target Tiger, front!" Fisher shouted, his voice cracking slightly despite his best efforts. "Morrison, hit the cupola or the turret ring. Driver, be ready to reverse on my command." But even as the words left his mouth, he saw the Tiger's turret beginning its rotation toward them. The German crew had spotted them simultaneously. Now it became a race. Who could acquire, aim, and fire first? In this race, the Sherman's faster turret rotation gave them a slight advantage, but the Tiger's superior optics and the experience of its crew could nullify that edge instantly. Morrison was already traversing right, his hand spinning the turret control with desperate speed, his eye pressed to the gunner's sight. 1,500, 1,400, 1,300, he muttered, counting down the range as he adjusted for the shot. His right hand hovered over the firing lever, waiting for that perfect moment when the reticle aligned with the target, and his brain, gun, and fate converged. Behind him, Harmon moved with his characteristic deliberation. He lifted the armor-piercing round, marked with its distinctive black tip, and brought it to the breech. His eyes performed the check his hands had done 1,000 times. No cracks in the casing, projectile seated properly, driving band intact. The entire inspection took perhaps 2 seconds, but to Morrison, waiting for that round to chamber so he could fire, it felt like hours. "Load faster, goddammit!" Morrison screamed, his voice raw with terror. Harmon didn't respond, didn't rush, didn't deviate from his procedure. He rotated the shell to align with the breech grooves, a step many loaders skipped in their haste, and then slid it home with firm, controlled pressure. The breech closed with a metallic clack that somehow rose above the chaos. "Up!" Harmon called, his voice steady, already reaching for the next round. Morrison fired. The Sherman rocked backward from the recoil, the confined space filling instantly with the acrid smoke and deafening concussion of the 76mm gun. Through his periscope, Fisher watched the tracer arc toward the Tiger, his breath caught in his chest. The round struck the Tiger's turret face, slightly right of center. A good hit, a solid hit. It ricocheted skyward with a brilliant orange spark, doing absolutely nothing. "Shit! Shit! Shit!" Morrison was already adjusting, knowing that the Tiger's response would come in seconds. The German tank's turret had completed its rotation. The massive 88mm gun barrel was now pointed directly at Eagle 7's frontal plate. Fisher could see down that barrel, could imagine the shell sitting in its breech, could visualize the German gunner's finger tightening on the firing mechanism. "Harmon!" Morrison shouted, his voice breaking. "Up!" came the immediate response. Harmon had already loaded the second round, his methodical process having taken perhaps 4 seconds from start to finish, faster than any panicked loader could have managed while maintaining perfect form. Morrison fired again, this time aiming for the Tiger's gun mantlet, hoping to hit the mechanical linkages or even deflect a round through the thinner armor beneath the gun. The Sherman rocked again, and again Fisher watched the tracer fly toward its target. This round hit the mantlet's edge and deflected downward, striking the hull where the glacis plate met the lower hull, a weak point in the Tiger's armor. The shell penetrated, and even from 200 yards, they could see the spark of entry. But there was no explosion, no fire, no catastrophic kill. The Tiger sat there, apparently functional, its gun still aimed at them. "No kill, no kill," Fisher shouted. "Driver, reverse now." Kowalski threw the Sherman into reverse, but the tank's notoriously underpowered engine meant their acceleration was measured in painful increments rather than the desperate speed they needed. They had been stationary, a perfect target. Now they were a slowly moving perfect target. The Tiger fired. The historical accounts vary slightly on what happened next, but the official after-action report filed by Lieutenant Fisher, which would later be studied at the Armor School as an example of crew coordination under extreme stress, provides the most reliable narrative. The German shell, an 88mm armor-piercing round carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through a brick wall after penetrating the Sherman, missed Eagle 7 by less than 3 feet. It screamed past their left side, so close that Kowalski later swore he felt the displacement of air through the driver's hatch and impacted a building behind them, sending a shower of stone and dust cascading over their engine deck. Why did it miss? The official report doesn't speculate, but veterans of the Cologne fighting would later offer theories. Perhaps the German gunner was wounded from earlier fighting. Perhaps their optics were damaged. Perhaps it was simply the chaos of urban combat, where distances were difficult to judge, and firing lanes disappeared and reappeared with every building collapse. Eagle 7's crew had perhaps 3 seconds to process their impossible survival before Morrison's voice cut through the cordite haze. Second Tiger, 3 o'clock, 150 yards, moving into position. The second Tiger emerged from Schildergasse like a steel apparition, its camouflage pattern of dark yellow and olive green making it appear to materialize from the ruins themselves. This tank was closer, much closer, and its crew had the advantage of having watched the first exchange. They knew Eagle 7's position, knew its crew was focused on the first Tiger, knew that human attention could only process so many threats at once. Fisher's world fragmented into impossible choices. The first Tiger was reloading, perhaps 8 to 10 seconds before it could fire again. The second Tiger was acquiring them right now, its turret rotating with mechanical precision toward the American tank. His Sherman had 1 gun, 2 targets, and approximately 5 seconds before at least one of those Tigers turned Eagle 7 into a crematorium for 5 men. Morrison, new target, 3 o'clock, Fisher commanded, making the choice that every tank commander dreaded. Ignore one lethal threat to engage another, hoping that speed and luck would let them survive long enough to address both. The Sherman's turret began its traverse, spinning away from the first Tiger toward the second. It was a 60-degree rotation, and Morrison pushed the hydraulic system to its limits, the mechanical whine rising to a shriek. Through his gunner's sight, he acquired the new target, saw the Tiger's hull directly facing them, the worst possible angle, the thickest armor, the point where their 76mm gun was least effective. "Can't pen the front! Can't pen the front!" Morrison shouted, his training warring with his instinct to just shoot, to do something, to not die passive. "Track him," Fisher ordered. "Immobilize him. Buy us time." Morrison adjusted his aim downward, targeting the Tiger's drive sprocket, the large wheel at the front of the tank that drove the tracks. It wasn't a killing shot, but a solid hit would strip the track, turn the Tiger into a stationary gun platform instead of a mobile death machine. In urban combat, mobility often meant survival. Behind Morrison, Harmon was already loading the third round. His hands moved through the familiar sequence, receive the shell from the ready rack, inspect it with eyes and fingers, rotate for alignment, guide it into the breach. His breathing remained steady, controlled, even as his mind screamed at him to rush, to cut corners, to save the seconds that might mean life or death. But he didn't rush. His uncle's words echoed in his memory. The ones who treated every round like it was the only round, those were the ones who came home. This was his third round in perhaps 20 seconds of combat, and he loaded it with the same care as the first, the same attention to detail, the same refusal to let fear dictate his procedure. "Up!" he called, and Morrison fired instantly. The round struck the Tiger's track assembly with a shower of sparks and shattered metal. The heavy track separated, one end whipping upward before crashing to the cobblestones. The Tiger lurched to the right as its left track continued driving, while the right track dragged uselessly. The German driver hit the brakes immediately, preventing the tank from spinning in circles. But the damage was done. The Tiger was immobilized. But immobilized didn't mean harmless. The Tiger's gun remained functional. Its turret continued rotating toward Eagle 7, and its crew now had the desperate fury of men who knew their mobility advantage was gone. They would shoot, and they would shoot to kill. "Fourth round, load AP!" Fisher commanded, even as he watched the first Tiger through his periscope. That tank was still operational, its gun barrels still pointed toward their last known position. Had the German crew adjusted for their movement? Were they lining up a shot right now? Harmon's hands were already moving, pulling another black-tipped armor-piercing round from the rack. He went through his sequence, checked the round, checked the brass, checked the seating, rotate for alignment. His shoulders ached from the repetitive motion, his hands were scraped from the sharp edges of the breech mechanism, and his ears rang from the concussive force of 3 76mm rounds fired in an enclosed space. But his movements remained precise, economical, correct. Up! Morrison had kept his sight on the immobilized Tiger, knowing that a stationary target was still a target. But where to shoot? The frontal armor was still impenetrable, the glacis plate still sloped at that impossible angle. He walked his sight upward, past the hull, past the turret front, to the cupola, the commander's hatch. It was a smaller target, but the armor there was thinner, designed to allow the commander to observe the battlefield. If he could get around through the cupola, he fired. The shell struck the Tiger's cupola at a slight angle, and for a heartbeat, Fisher thought it had failed to penetrate, had ricocheted like the first shot. But then he saw smoke begin pouring from the commander's hatch, saw the Tiger's turret rotation stop mid-traverse. The round had penetrated, had wreaked havoc inside the fighting compartment, had either killed or wounded the crew. "Kill! Kill on the second Tiger!" Fisher shouted, allowing himself a moment of savage triumph. But only a moment. "First Tiger is moving," Kowalski called from the driver's position. "He's advancing on us." The first Tiger, having reloaded, began a maneuver that demonstrated either supreme confidence or tactical desperation. Rather than remaining in its hull-down position behind the collapsed building, it accelerated forward, its massive engine roaring as it closed the distance between itself and Eagle 7. The German commander was making a calculated gamble, get close enough that the Sherman couldn't retreat, couldn't maneuver, couldn't escape the killing shot that was coming. At 150 yards, even the Sherman's modest 76mm gun had a fighting chance against some parts of the Tiger's armor, but only if the crew could survive long enough to find those weak points, and only if those weak points presented themselves. "He's charging us!" Morrison's voice carried a note of disbelief. Tigers didn't charge. They sat back and used their superior range and armor to methodically destroy opposition. This was something different, something more dangerous. A cornered predator becoming aggressive, Fisher's tactical computer, the human brain's remarkable ability to process complex battlefield variables in split seconds, ran through the scenario. The Tiger was coming straight at them, which meant they were looking at its thickest frontal armor. But it also meant the Tiger's gun, while aimed at them, would be bouncing and swaying as the tank traversed the rubble-strewn street. The German gunner would be fighting his own tank's movement, trying to keep his sight steady while the Tiger crashed over debris and shell holes. Eagle 7, by contrast, was now stationary. Kowalski had stopped their reverse, knowing that a slowly moving tank was often harder to shoot from than a stationary one. But a stationary tank provided a rock-solid firing platform. "Hold position," Fisher commanded. "Morrison, you're going to get 1, maybe 2 shots before he's on top of us. Make them count. Aim for the lower glacis, where it meets the hull. If you can get under that plate—" "I know the spot," Morrison interrupted, his eye pressed so hard against his sight that it would leave a bruise. "I see it. 140 yards. 130. Jesus, he's fast." The Tiger II, which this model appeared to be based on its profile, could reach speeds of nearly 24 miles per hour on roads. In the rubble of Cologne, it was probably managing half that, but even 12 miles per hour looked terrifyingly fast when 80 tons of armor was bearing down on you with an 88mm gun. Behind Morrison, Harmon had entered a state that athletes call flow and soldiers call combat consciousness. His world had narrowed to the task at hand: load the gun. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but there was nothing mechanical about his mind. He was acutely aware of every variable: the temperature in the fighting compartment affecting the round's propellant, the slight cant of the tank affecting how the shells would seat, the fatigue in his muscles requiring fractional adjustments to his movements. He loaded the 5th round with the same deliberate care as the 4th, the 3rd, the 1st. "Up!" Morrison fired at 120 yards. The engagement envelope of tank combat, that is, the range at which different weapon systems become effective against different armor configurations, is a matter of complex mathematics involving muzzle velocity, armor thickness, angle of impact, and projectile design. According to the technical specifications documented in the Aberdeen Proving Grounds testing reports from 1944, a 76mm M1A1 gun firing M62 armor-piercing ammunition could penetrate approximately 100mm of armor at a 90-degree angle at 100 yards. Morrison joined them, having completed his own post-combat checks of the turret rotation mechanism. "Jimmy, I need to ask you something," he said, his voice carrying none of the earlier tension or criticism. "During that whole fight, were you scared?" "Because I was terrified, and I'm wondering how you stayed so calm." Harmon finally looked up from his inspection, meeting Morrison's eyes. "I was scared the whole time, Bill, every single second. But my uncle taught me something about fear. You can't let it touch your hands. Your mind can be screaming, your heart can be racing, but your hands have to stay steady. That's the difference between the loaders who come home and the ones who don't." He returned to his work, running a cleaning rod through the barrel to check for any obstructions or damage. "Besides, I knew you'd make your shots count. I've seen you shoot. You're the best gunner I've served with. All I had to do was keep feeding you good rounds, and I knew you'd do the rest." It was a simple statement, but it encapsulated something profound about crew dynamics in armored warfare. Each man depended absolutely on the others to perform their roles with precision. A brilliant gunner was useless without a loader who could supply ammunition reliably. A skilled loader couldn't save a crew if the driver positioned them poorly, and all the tactical skill in the world meant nothing if the commander couldn't coordinate their actions into a cohesive whole. The arrival of Major General Maurice Rose, commanding officer of the 3rd Armored Division, was unexpected, but not unprecedented. Rose had a reputation for visiting frontline units, for understanding that leadership meant more than studying maps in a comfortable headquarters. He arrived in a Jeep that looked like it had seen hard use, accompanied by his aide and a photographer from Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. Fisher called the crew to attention as Rose approached, but the general waved off the formality. "At ease, gentlemen. I'm not here for a parade. I'm here because what you did this morning is exactly the kind of aggressive, skillful tank fighting that's going to win this war." He walked around Eagle 7, examining the tank with an expert's eye, noting the absence of damage, the readiness of the crew, the professional manner in which they had arranged their equipment. "2 Tigers in 90 seconds, Rose said, shaking his head with something like disbelief. "I've read the radio logs. Lieutenant Fisher, walk me through the engagement." Fisher provided a concise tactical briefing, describing the initial contact, the decision to engage both targets, the sequence of shots, and the eventual outcome. Rose listened intently, occasionally asking questions about sight pictures, range estimation, and crew coordination. When Fisher finished, Rose turned to address the entire crew. "What you accomplished today will be studied, analyzed, and taught to future tank crews. But I want you to understand why it matters beyond just the tactical victory. Every Tiger we destroy means American infantry don't have to face it. Every German tank knocked out shortens this war, saves American lives, brings us closer to victory." He paused, his expression serious. "I'm recommending this crew for commendation. Bronze stars for the entire crew, and I'm putting Corporal Harmon in for a Silver Star for his actions under fire." Harmon's face showed genuine surprise. "Sir, I was just loading the gun, doing my job." "Exactly right, Corporal," Rose replied. "You were doing your job, but you were doing it so well under such extreme conditions that it made the difference between survival and disaster. That's what medals are for, recognizing excellence when it matters most." The photographer from Stars and Stripes began taking pictures of the crew with Eagle 7 in the background, the burning Tigers visible in the distance. These photographs would appear in the newspaper within a week, bringing the story of the engagement to hundreds of thousands of American servicemen across Europe. The caption would read, "Sherman crew destroys 2 Tigers in single engagement. Crew coordination and steady nerves make the difference." As the afternoon progressed and the crew prepared to move to a bivouac area for the night, Harmon found a quiet moment to write in the small journal he kept in his combat vest. His entry for March the 8th, 1945, was characteristically understated. "Engaged 2 German heavy tanks today. 6 rounds fired. Both targets destroyed. Lieutenant Fisher says we did something special. I just did what Uncle Frank taught me. Treat every round like it's the only one that matters. We all went home tonight. That's what matters." The official records tell a more comprehensive story. The after-action report filed by First Lieutenant Robert Fisher, preserved in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, provides detailed information about the engagement, including range estimates, ammunition expenditure, and the condition of both friendly and enemy vehicles post-engagement. The report concludes with Fisher's personal assessment. The success of this engagement can be attributed to three factors: superior crew coordination, the gunner's exceptional marksmanship under pressure, and most critically, the loader's methodical, disciplined approach to ammunition handling, which ensured zero malfunctions during sustained rapid fire. The days following March the 8th brought a curiosity from other tank crews in Combat Command B. Word had spread through the division about Eagle 7's engagement, and loaders in particular wanted to understand Harmon's technique. What was this slow method that had somehow proven faster when it mattered most? Sergeant First Class Harold Martinez, a veteran loader from another Sherman crew, approached Harmon during a maintenance halt 3 days after the Tiger engagement. Martinez had been loading tank guns since the North African campaign and had strong opinions about proper procedure. "I heard you take your time with every round," Martinez said, watching as Harmon performed his routine inspection of Eagle 7's ammunition. "That you check every shell like you're inspecting diamonds." "Something like that," Harmon replied, holding a 76mm round up to the light, examining the brass casing for any signs of corrosion or damage. "That's going to get you killed in a sustained fight," Martinez said bluntly. "You need to be able to slam rounds in there, keep the gun fed. Speed is survival." Harmon set down the shell and turned to face Martinez, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "How many times has your gun jammed during combat?" Martinez paused, then admitted, "Twice. Once in Tunisia, once at Saint-Lô. Both times we had to take precious seconds to clear the jam while taking fire." "And how many times has mine jammed?" "I'm guessing never, or we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Never," Harmon confirmed, "because I don't rush, I don't panic, I don't let the fear make me sloppy. Each round is inspected, aligned, and loaded correctly. Yes, it takes maybe 2 seconds longer than your method. But those 2 seconds mean I never have to spend 10 seconds clearing a jam, never have to tell my gunner, 'Hold on, we've got a problem,' while a Tiger is lining up his shot." Martinez crossed his arms, his skepticism evident. "You got lucky. 2 Tigers don't make you an expert." "You're right," Harmon said calmly. 2 Tigers don't make me an expert, but 6 perfect loads in 90 seconds, under the worst conditions imaginable, with 0 malfunctions. That's not luck. That's procedure. That's discipline. That's treating every round with the respect it deserves." He picked up the shell again, showing Martinez the inspection process, checking the driving band for damage, examining the projectile seating, looking for any cracks in the brass casing that might cause a separation during firing. "This takes 3 seconds. 3 seconds of prevention that could save 30 seconds of cure. In a tank fight, 30 seconds is an eternity." The conversation was overheard by several other loaders, and Harmon found himself giving an impromptu class on loading procedure. He demonstrated his technique, explaining the reasoning behind each step, showing how proper alignment prevented jams, how careful inspection caught defects before they could cause catastrophic failures. "The breech mechanism on a 76mm gun has tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch," he explained, using a spent shell casing as a demonstration tool. "If you slam a round in at an angle, even slightly off axis, you can damage the breech threads. Maybe not enough to fail immediately, but enough to cause problems later. And later, in combat, might be the exact moment you need that gun to work." Lieutenant Fisher, observing the impromptu training session, felt a mixture of pride and vindication. He had been ready to replace Harmon for being too slow, had doubted the corporal's methods, had nearly made a decision that would have cost them all their lives. Now he was watching Harmon share knowledge that could save other crews, could turn the Sherman's primary weakness, its gun's relative lack of power compared to German armor, into a strength through sheer reliability. The technical specifications of the M1A1 76mm gun, as documented in War Department Technical Manual 9-718 published in 1944, emphasized the importance of proper loading procedure. The manual devoted 3 full pages to the correct method of loading ammunition, including warnings about common errors that could lead to jams or misfires. Harmon's technique, while more deliberate than most loaders employed in combat conditions, adhered perfectly to the technical manual's specifications. But manuals were one thing, combat reality was another. The psychological pressure of loading a gun while enemy shells were impacting around you, while your commander was shouting orders, while every fiber of your being screamed to hurry, to rush, to just get the round in and get the gun shooting. That pressure destroyed discipline in most men. Harmon had found a way to maintain his procedure regardless of external conditions, and that mental discipline was perhaps more valuable than the physical technique itself. By the time Cologne fell completely to Allied forces on March the 16th, Harmon's slow-loading method had become something of a legend within the 3rd Armored Division. Young loaders were told to emulate Corporal Harmon if they wanted to survive the war. Veteran loaders who had been rushing their loads for years began reconsidering their procedures, adding inspection steps they had previously skipped in the interest of speed. The cultural shift was subtle, but significant. Tank crews began valuing reliability over raw speed, began understanding that the fastest shooting tank wasn't necessarily the one that survived longest. The Sherman's mechanical reliability, already superior to most German tanks by 1945, became even more pronounced when crews adopted procedures that prevented self-inflicted mechanical failures. The war in Europe ended 8 weeks after the engagement at Cologne Cathedral Square. Eagle 7 and its crew participated in the final drive across Germany, crossed the Elbe River, and were positioned near the Czech border when word came of Germany's unconditional surrender on May the 8th, 1945. They had fought through 16 more engagements after March the 8th, destroyed 4 more German tanks, Panzer IV models, less formidable than Tigers but still deadly, and supported infantry operations in a dozen towns whose names blurred together in memory. Through it all, Harmon loaded with his characteristic deliberation, and through it all, Eagle 7's gun never jammed, never misfired, never failed. When the crew finally returned to the United States in September 1945, they were processed out at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. The Army, rapidly demobilizing, was eager to return millions of servicemen to civilian life. Fisher, Morrison, Kowalski, and Harmon received their discharge papers on the same day, a bureaucratic coincidence that allowed them to share one final formation together. "What are you going to do?" Morrison asked Harmon as they stood in line at the separation center, wearing fresh uniforms and carrying duffel bags that held everything they owned. "Go back to Bakersfield," Harmon said. "My uncle's farm. Work with my hands. Maybe teach my nephews what he taught me. How to do things right, even when everyone around you is rushing. You ever think about staying in? Army could use instructors like you. God knows the armor school could benefit from your perspective." Harmon shook his head. "I did my part. Now I want to live somewhere where the worst thing that can happen is a tractor breakdown, not an 88mm shell coming through the hull." They exchanged addresses, promises to write, the kind of intentions that combat veterans made with complete sincerity and rarely followed through on. The bonds forged in Eagle 7's fighting compartment were profound, but they were also tied to a time and place that all of them desperately wanted to leave behind. Fisher was the exception. He stayed in the Army, accepted a regular commission, and spent the next 25 years in armored units. He commanded a tank company in Korea, served as an instructor at Fort Knox, and eventually retired as a colonel in 1970. Throughout his career, he told the story of March the 8th, 1945, using it to illustrate lessons about crew coordination, the importance of procedure, and the value of trusting your soldiers' expertise. When the Armor School developed its revised curriculum for tank crew training in 1948, Fisher was one of the officers consulted. He ensured that Harmon's loading technique, the deliberate load method, was incorporated into the training program. Generations of tank loaders learned a procedure that emphasized inspection and correct alignment over raw speed, though few of them knew they were learning a technique refined in 90 seconds of combat in Cologne. Morrison went home to Texas, married his high school sweetheart, and spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer. He never spoke about the war to his children, who only learned about their father's experiences after finding his Silver Star Medal in a drawer after his death in 1993. The citation, yellowed with age, described extraordinary heroism in action against enemy armor forces and marksmanship of the highest order under extreme combat conditions. Kowalski returned to Chicago, worked in his family's construction business, and passed away in 2001. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II but provided no details. His grandchildren, going through his effects, found a photograph, one of the images taken by the Stars and Stripes photographer on March the 8th, showing 5 young men standing beside a Sherman tank, their expressions showing exhaustion, relief, and something that might have been pride. Harmon went back to Bakersfield as he had planned. He married, raised 3 children, and worked his uncle's farm until he retired in 1985. He rarely spoke about the war, though his children remembered him teaching them the importance of doing things correctly, carefully, methodically. Fast doesn't matter if you do it wrong, he would tell them, words that carried weight far beyond their apparent simplicity. In 2008, when Harmon was 85 years old, a military historian researching 3rd Armored Division actions in the Cologne campaign contacted him for an interview. The historian had come across the after-action reports from March 8, 1945, and wanted to understand the human story behind the tactical success. Harmon agreed to the interview, though he downplayed his role with characteristic modesty. "I just loaded the gun," he said. "Bill Morrison made the shots. Lieutenant Fisher made the decisions. Tommy Kowalski drove us where we needed to be. I just did my small part." The historian pressed him about his technique, about the slow loading method that had become part of armor school curriculum without most instructors knowing its origin. Harmon explained his uncle's lessons, the philosophy behind the procedure, the mental discipline required to maintain consistency under pressure. "Did you ever think in those 90 seconds that what you were doing would be taught to soldiers decades later?" the historian asked. Harmon was quiet for a long moment before responding. "In those 90 seconds, I thought about staying alive. I thought about keeping my hand steady. I thought about my crew, about doing right by them. Everything else, the medals, the recognition, the legacy, that all came later. In the moment, there was just the task. Load the gun correctly. Everything else was noise." The interview became part of an oral history project archived at the United States Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Researchers studying crew dynamics in armored warfare still reference Harmon's testimony, finding in his words insights about leadership, training, and the psychology of combat that remain relevant despite decades of technological advancement. James Harmon passed away in 2012 at the age of 89. His obituary in the Bakersfield, California newspaper mentioned his military service, but focused primarily on his life as a farmer, husband, and father. There was a single line about his Silver Star, awarded for gallantry in action during combat operations in Germany. What the obituary couldn't capture, what no citation or medal or historical document could fully express, was the ripple effect of 90 seconds in March 1945. 5 men had faced 2 tigers and survived because one of them understood that the right way was the fast way, that discipline under pressure was worth more than desperate speed. That procedure was a form of courage. The Sherman tank itself, that much maligned workhorse of the American armored force, proved that day what many combat veterans already knew, that superior technology mattered less than superior crews. Eagle 7 didn't win because it had a better gun than the Tigers or thicker armor or more powerful engine. It won because 5 men did their jobs with precision, coordination, and unwavering procedure even when death was measured in seconds and distances were counted in yards. The 2 destroyed Tigers were eventually cleared from the Cathedral Square, cut up for scrap, their steel recycled into the reconstruction of a shattered Germany. Eagle 7 survived the war and was eventually scrapped as well, just another obsolete tank in an army rapidly transitioning to new technologies and new doctrines. But the lesson of March 8, 1945 endured. In the classrooms of Fort Benning's Armor School, in the training grounds where new generations of tank crews learned their trade, in the institutional memory of the United States Army's armored forces, the story persisted, how 5 men in a Sherman destroyed 2 Tigers in 90 seconds, and how a loader named James Harmon proved that the deliberate hand was faster than the desperate one. The technical specifications have changed. The M4 Sherman gave way to the M26 Pershing, then the M48 Patton, the M60, and eventually the M1 Abrams. The guns grew larger, the armor thicker, the fire control systems more sophisticated. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Crews who maintained their procedures under pressure, who refused to let fear dictate their actions, who treated each task with the importance it deserved. Those crews survived. Those crews won. And somewhere in the archives, in the yellowed after-action reports and fading photographs, in the oral histories and technical manuals, the evidence remains of what happened when preparation met opportunity, when discipline confronted chaos, when one loader's slow reloading style let a Sherman destroy 2 Tigers in 90 seconds. The words of James Harmon, recorded in that 2008 interview just 4 years before his death, perhaps best summarize the lesson. People ask if I was a hero. I wasn't. I was a loader who did his job right. But I learned something in those 90 seconds that served me the rest of my life. There's no such thing as an unimportant task. Every round mattered. Every inspection mattered. Every second of discipline mattered. Not because I was special, but because when you do ordinary things extraordinarily well, extraordinary results follow. That's not heroism. That's just craftsmanship under pressure. And that, I learned from my uncle, is enough. The account of Eagle 7's engagement on March 8, 1945, is drawn from official after-action reports filed by First Lieutenant Robert Fisher and preserved in the National Archives, as well as divisional records from the 3rd Armored Division's operations in the Cologne sector. While certain dialogue and internal thoughts have been reconstructed for narrative purposes, the essential facts of the engagement, including the 90-second time frame, the destruction of 2 Tiger tanks, and the zero-malfunction performance of Eagle 7's main gun, are documented in historical records.